Hello, hello. Nice to see
Oh,
everyone again. Sorry I have been away, but thank you so much to Joni for stepping in heroically, particularly it was a difficult start last week. I'm sorry for that, for those that were there. But as we have since discussed, there must be a lesson in everything. Um, or at least we have the option to look for one, even when it's terrible. Uh, I have a little bit of pre-planned content today. It's a little more structure than normal, but not that much. So that means we have a little bit of visiting time before we get there, and I wonder if anybody has anything they would like to unmute and share about or comment on or anything like that at all. Anybody? Yeah, I see Eve's hand up. Come on, and then Carol after you. Go ahead, Eve.
just short. Jonathan, I don't always get the email when Joni's going to be holding it.
Probably so I noticed that last week I don't think I got an email out. And I
Okay.
realized that because to be honest, when I went to send today's email, I was like, "Oh, I think this one was I was starting to prepare one for last week." Typically when I don't show up, it's because something's happened in my life or my work where my schedule is completely different, or I'm traveling or I'm unavailable, which explains sometimes when am not the host, I get the newsletter out, and sometimes when I'm not the host, I don't. Because I think the week before I did. And the only explanation is it's usually the same reason.
Okay.
Which means I would have to somehow figure it out even earlier. But then I don't know if I'm capable of that. I can try. I'll try. Now,
Okay.
generally speaking, and Garth, we were just talking to him about this. Generally speaking, it is a secure connection and it is a secure link. And I guess what happened last week was exceptionally unusual, but it does happen. If you consider the millions of Zoom calls that are happening every day, there's always crazy people that are trying to hack the system. But I'm only saying that because if you ever don't get the link, it's usually the same link. So you just need to find the last newsletter and you can always get in. Um, any other comments or questions? Carol, your hand was up for a second there.
Yes. Last time we spoke, I was traveling, but you made a suggestion of reading a book, Coyote Medicine.
Oh, yeah.
I've got hold of it and I've just about started it. And just the first few pages just blew me away.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's about page 32, it's not very far in. And he goes to a doctor's meeting and one of the senior surgeons, um, when they're discussing the patients that are in there, because of a procedure that they've carried out, has caused more problem. And he just said, "Well, we'll never be out of a job because we create the work."
Whoa. What a horrible, sick and disgusting kind of humor. Hopefully, only humor. It's funny that you should mention that book because I haven't seen it, in a while. It's an older publication now, about 30 years, I would guess, maybe a little more. But just by synchronicity, just within a day or two of me suggesting it to you, I stopped by a little bookstore in town, a metaphysical bookstore where I live. I've never stopped there, and they were in a new location, and they had it on the shelf, like on display. And I thought, oh, how odd. I said, this is like not a new book. She said, oh, I know, it's old, but it's one of my favorites, so I just keep recommending it. And I said, that's funny. I do too. So I'm glad you've got it. I think it's great right till the
Mm.
end. Jan, did you ever meet Louis Melmadrona in your work, your line of work? No. Lanny, you did? Was that at a workshop or he was kind of a
Yeah,
kooky dude?
I sponsored him here in town. Uh, Remember I used to do workshops and stuff like that, so I sponsored him coming to town. Was it Coyote Medicine you recommended, by the way, or what book did
Yeah.
you Okay. The good news, he's a character and he's very wise. And the good news is I got word out. I happen to know somebody who was in TV and they mentioned it. The bad news is that a lot of the native people came to protest because they didn't want him to sell information.
Um,
Um, and I offered scholarships to people, blah blah. But it was wonderful. It was really well attended. So
yeah, he always struggled with that in his life.
Could you
Um,
tell us the name of the book again, please? I want to write it down.
yeah, it's called Coyote Medicine, and it's by Louis Mel Madrona, but you're not going to have a hard time looking it up by the name of the book. Is a long last name, Lewis, Lewis. I I don't know if I have it handy here to show you, but yeah, and not everything in there would be new, especially for people like those on this call, but it's beautifully written. I think it's his best book by far. And just reminds us so much about what healing is and what healing isn't. Yeah, some books just sort of feel like a little bit of their own experience and not just a bunch of information. So there's that. And then just quickly, the comment Lanny made is that, Lewis is himself of mixed ancestry. He is indigenous by birth. Um, but he's also operated in the non-indigenous world, and he feels that some of this knowledge needs to be shared. I don't personally think he shares anything particularly secretive. On the other hand, appropriation is just a sensitive topic, and so some people, I think, just out of principle, react to anyone sharing anything about marginalized communities. So there's that. Somebody else had their hand. Lori, did you want to add or ask something? You have to unmute though. There you
I
go.
was I was just gonna say, I found it on Half Price Books. It's and they have multiple copies, I guess, and so it might be even cheaper. And there's one that Andrew Will does the forward to. So the two books look different. It must be a newer version, maybe.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
I don't know. I seem to remember he was in that. He did that forward from the beginning, but that's a good tip. Deborah. Where's Deborah? Oh. Oh, Debbie. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, did you want to add something?
No, I'm just listening.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Jan?
I'm just finishing reading Braiding Sweetgrass.
Oh, yeah. What a good
Are you?
book.
I just want to know if you're familiar with that. It's just wonderful.
Yeah. That's a very special book.
Yeah.
Braiding Sweetgrass and Sacred Instructions are two really fabulous books for insight into not just I mean they're about indigenous worldview, but they're really about so much more, about spirituality and I mean everything, right? Mind and earth and relationships. Yeah, that is rightfully a very celebrated book, Braiding Sweetgrass. That should be a top 10 on people's lists. Thank you. Well, I'd say we're at the end of our schmoozing and chatting small talk time. Does anybody have any last little tidbits to squeeze in before we take a little breath together and then dive in? Joni's showing us. Oh, I know it's Stephen Buhner. It's blurry for some reason, and you're muted. Muted and
Background
blurry.
is blurry, so I'm not going to be able to show it. But
Wonder why that is.
well,
If you
I
put
did
it
that
in
on
front
purpose.
of yourself, put it in front of you, would be able to see it. There you go.
Alrighty. Oh, right, because you have your blur on.
Yeah.
Very good. And it's called Secret Teachings of Plants, which also it's not an indigenous book, and it is about plants, but in a similar way, it's about consciousness and energy and the universe. It's a very special book, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Stephen Buhner. Shannon, hello. This is fun, sharing the books.
Speaking of books, Jonathan,
Yes.
will we be discussing your new book, or have you already, or what?
Well, we did when it first came out have, I don't know. I know I mentioned it a lot. I don't remember. I think we maybe had a class where we specifically talked about it.
Uh-uh.
But I don't know, there's a lot in there. There's actually an interesting approach to the book that honestly, it was a missed marketing opportunity because I just wasn't thinking. Which is that I think for each of the 7 types in the book, a spiritual experience, for each of the 7 types of experience, there is a different type of spiritual master.
Hmm.
And the fun thing about that, and I don't mean to be too um, commercial, but there could be a really fun way to create a kind of find your, you know, sacred mastery type, right? Are you a wizard? Are you a priest? Are you a shaman? Are you a mystic? Something like that. So I've created something that's not in the book, is my point. That could be a fun sort of conversation, Shannon, where we could come back to the book, talk about it a bit, and then expand into a new direction. So, point noted. Okay, well, on that note, so what I'd like to do, today's topic is stages of the journey. And speaking of synchronicities, I have found the work of Joseph Campbell popping up again in my life quite a bit lately. Joseph Campbell, I'm going to assume everybody has heard of, and I hope that many of you have read. He has written a tremendous amount. So if you were to do a search for his books, it's almost overwhelming. And he's definitely, he was a complicated character in some ways because he was profoundly, mystical in himself, very psychologically sophisticated in his work. But he didn't promote himself as a spiritual teacher. He saw himself very much as an academic, and he was famous for revealing patterns and archetypes and persistent designs in sacred literature. That's basically it. So he became known as sort of the preeminent mythologist of the new world, the new age. And some challenged his work over time by saying it became too mystical, too psychological, and maybe not rigorous enough academically. He was reading things almost too poetically. I don't know. I I think that's probably just jealousy. Um, and then over the years, I mean, we're just talking about the material and the facts. And then over the years, after he died, some people questioned his personal life and whether he was sexist or things like that. And the only thing I will say is, I don't know. I don't know anything about him personally. I think what we do know is that his system of mapping archetypes, symbols, and in particular, what he called the hero's journey, has absolutely stood the test of time. His work has been vetted, recycled, used by psychologists, it's been used by storytellers, it's been used by historians, academics, it's been used by, actually the world of film has relied heavily on the work of Joseph Campbell, a shocking number of classes in screenwriting and storytelling and of course also creative writing use his work. And the simple fact is that his work has persisted and been celebrated because it holds up. And not only does it hold up in the storytelling of the human community across cultures and throughout time, but I would argue that it very much holds up against our own lived experience. That what he really what he was able to reveal is that for thousands of years, our spiritual and religious traditions have been clothing the core archetypes of the human experience, the human mind, the human heart. And that while it may sound like a different story because it's in one part of the world or another, or at one time in history or another, that if we learn how to look and how to listen, we discover very easily this is the same story that we all share. So I thought perhaps we could have a little moment to get centered, have a little meditation, a little centering or something like that. And then we'll get into it. And well, and most importantly, once we cover the 12, it's 12 in Joseph Campbell's framework. Once we do a review of the whole framework, I would just love to hear examples of your experience or how it fits for you. And so we will get to our chatting as well. All right. Intro complete. Let's take another step. So I'm going to invite you wherever you are and whatever you're doing to pause. I'm going to invite you to sit with your eyes closed, comfortably but alert. And let's take a breath together, each in your own way, but together as one. In through the nose, big exaggerated breath, and then just yawn, sigh, breathe it out, let it go. And we'll do that about 3 or 4 times. Big, big inhalation through the nose. And then an exhale out through the mouth. With each exhale, let your shoulders drop. Let your body soften. Let yourself become increasingly aware of the stillness around you. And then softly drawing in your next breath, bring it in through the nose and then hold it a moment. And then breathe out through your mouth, but this time extending the exhale as fully, completely as you can, even extending it beyond comfort. And then can return to the cycle in through the nose. Pause and hold for a moment. The long exhale. With each exhale, feel yourself softening, slowing down, coming more clearly into the present moment. And taking a moment just to expand your awareness through your experience, first noticing what's going on in your body. Maybe it's the temperature in the room or the texture of the textiles beneath your fingers. Are you comfortable or experiencing discomfort in some way? Are you smelling, hearing, tasting, sensing anything else? And affirming the beauty and the importance of our spiritual dimension, but recognizing that while we have a spiritual dimension, we are not a physical dimension, we are not only physical. We are more than that. Taking time now to observe the quality of your thoughts. How's your mind right now? Is it wandering, storytelling, distracted, planning something else, secretly thinking of or looking at something else? Just notice the quality of your thoughts right now and this morning. And again, appreciating recognizing the brilliance and the power of our world of thoughts, the mental world, intellectual world, and letting it go. We have thoughts, but we are not our thoughts. Moving your awareness now to your emotional condition today. And just noticing how you've been, and see if you can find words for it more than happy, sad, frustrated, but seek a little nuance. Worried, distressed, enthusiastic, curious. Just see if you can find some richer language for what is going on in your emotional world right now and today and lately. And again, appreciating the beauty and the power of our emotional life, but affirming for a moment that we are not our emotions. And we are going to take another step to just reflect and observe our spiritual life. And that means taking a moment to appreciate the practices, the philosophies, the teachers, even the identity we feel spiritually, whether that's by faith or path or something else. And with a breath, letting it go as well. And we have a spiritual life, but we are more than that as well. And so finally, we take this moment just to be quiet and without too much thought, just to sense the observing self, the conscious present witness that experiences the body, the mind, the heart, the spiritual journey, and yet itself remains eternally more. This resilient, eternal, peaceful place inside you behind it all is the truth of who you are. Beautiful and untouchable. And when you're ready, we can come back to the group. Alrighty then. Oh, that was hard coming back. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the spiritual journey. So I'm going to share my screen, and I have a little presentation for you today. Stages of the journey, how the soul grows wise and well on the spiritual path with me. All right, so it may at first, when we look at some of the simplest breakdowns of transformation and change, some of this may seem almost rhetorical or redundant. Like, why would we even need to say this? One model is as simple as ordinary, otherworldly, ordinary, right? So it's like things are the way they are, then we're challenged and we're taken out of ourselves, and then we come back to the way things were. It can be that simple. Yeah, there's also ordinary, threshold, right, which is a time of transition, otherworld, return. Very, very, very simple stuff. And yet, the value of recognizing these stages that we move through, or the fact that the value of recognizing the stages that we move through is, first of all, to simply recognize that we do move through stages. Now, it's best to understand these things sort of circularly, or what you might call in a spiral, because I think the mistake that happens for many of us is we start to believe that whatever is normal life is what we are always in, or what we are always going through. But that's not really true. There are times where it's business as usual, and then there are times of crisis or calling, or times in which we are no longer aligned with our normal life. We are at odds with our normal life. And that is worth acknowledging in itself, that it's okay if things aren't always normal. It's not only okay that we don't always feel congruent with our lives, because this crisis is often a call to action. In many of the spiritual models of growth and in the storytelling world, there ain't no growth without the crisis. And so we can bemoan the crisis that we're in, or we can say, aha, this is part of the journey. And no matter how bad it is right now, if I open my eyes and begin the work, this will just be a stage and a step that I look back on. In a basic breakdown, and there's lots of ways to do this, crisis typically leads us to separation. And when I say separation, I mean separation from normal life. Excuse me. Oh, I hope that noise is not too much. You'll tell me if it is, but I had to put on my heater, believe it or not. So separation. Separation means that very often when we do the work of facing crisis, challenge, opportunity, transition, upheaval in our life, we are going to have to go into a non-ordinary stage, right? So this could be a time of healing. This could be a time of exploration. This could be a time of research. It could be a physical time of travel. It could be a long trip to the hospital. But the idea is that normal life has been interrupted by something, and to deal with that something, we need to separate from normal life for a little while. Sometimes it might even not look like anything too dramatic on the surface. But for example, many of us know the feeling of going through, quote, something, and then maybe just stepping out of things. So we don't show up for the groups we normally go to for a while, or we don't go to the places we normally do for a while. We hide out a little bit, would be an example. This separation, this process of separation, I guess I'm describing, is about moving ourselves into another worldview, into another mindset, exposing ourselves to other things, or taking time for the reflection that we need. But there's a value in acknowledging that separation and other world are stages in themselves, because for some of us, the simple process of recognizing the crisis and choosing to spend time in, quote, another world, is as significant as the crisis or the other world. In other words, the separation process can be where all the work is happening for some of us. And again, this is the value of breaking things down into stages, because we're not all going to be comfortable in the same way with the same stages. Some of us respond really well to the crisis stage and move gracefully and quickly to the separation. Some of us stay stuck in the crisis stage and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and seem to need to spend a lot of time there. Others move through the crisis into separating and embracing the other world very easily. Others get stuck in the other world, right? We say to people, well, I need a little time for myself. And we start pulling out, start pulling away, start retreating, but then we don't go back, right? Oh, I'm going to go on a little trip. Oh, I'm going to extend it another week. Oh, I'm going to extend it another week. You know, I'm going to step out of this group for a week, and then it's 2 weeks, and it's 3 weeks, and then it's 2 months. So this is the idea that by being self-aware of the different stages, we can acknowledge how we may handle them or how we may naturally respond to them or resist them. So the return is just as important as the separation. And for many of us, the return can be a point of getting stuck. You know, there's that sort of feeling of you're always getting ready to get ready, right? You're always getting ready for things to be different. You've done all your learning and your therapy and your work and all this stuff. And now I just got to get the right plan. I just got to make sure I talk to the right people. And there's this sort of transition between all the other world experiences and gifts and bringing it home and integrating it. When we look at the expanded story, you'll see how any one of these things can turn into a lot more. It is also true that there is a balance with every one of these five. And by that, I mean, we can resist any one of them. We can stay too long in any one of them. And we can overlook the significance of any one of them. So normal life is important and valuable, but not always. Sometimes we need to question it. Crisis is important and valuable, but we can't stay there. Separation, important and valuable, but we can't stay there. And so on and so on and so on. And ultimately, we come to realize that while the time may expand and contract in each of these different stages, we are all perpetually moving through them on greater and lesser levels. So even in a stage of what we might call normal life, there may be a small journey that happens, or a concurrent journey that happens, if that makes any sense. Does anybody want to jump in and comment on this before we go to the big, overwhelming Joseph Campbell version? We're good? Okay. So here we go. And I even prepared a few notes for myself in case I get a little distracted, but I want to be sort of efficient because what I'm more interested in is hearing maybe some illustrations of how you've experienced these. So the starting point for Joseph Campbell's 12 is the ordinary world. Now, it's going to be helpful to either think of yourself as I go through these, or maybe think of some of your favorite stories, adventure stories, or scriptures, whether it's the life of Jesus or the life of Buddha or other great masters. Most of them will fall into this quest archetype. There are some variations and differences. In fact, ordinary world is one of them. Ordinary world typically in a story begins with the relatable character. So what we see is they're only human. And that's the little girl on the field that dreams of a bigger life, or the boy that's teased at school and dreams of another way of being. But it starts with just recognizing that every great master, every great healer, every great hero is at some level relatable. They're like us. And there are some tricky exceptions, Jesus being one of them. And yet, what we would certainly agree with the Jesus story is that even though he himself is never considered normal from the beginning, it is abundantly clear he's born into an ordinary world. And despite the fact that he is an outlier in this sort of model, in other ways he's not, because the actual birth story of Jesus emphatically emphasizes how ordinary, or what we often call humble, his origins are. So born in a manger, simple family. The idea is, even though he's a magical being, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't make this reference because I don't mean it to be insulting, but sort of like Superman who comes from another planet and his parents are like these superpower beings. They stick him in a pod and he ends up on a farm in Kansas or something like that. Well, sorry, Jesus, but they're similar stories. It's relatable. Um, Luke Skywalker would be another good example. Also born of extraordinary, powerful Jedis, but you know, he's a farmer on Tatooine. Okay, let's keep going. The call to adventure. So typically there is some kind of threat to the safety of the person on the journey. Now, if you're thinking about your own healing path, it might be a threat to your health. It might be a relationship that becomes unsafe, like there's conflict. It could be work that you are losing or you're afraid of losing or you feel you're losing. Um, and sometimes it's more mundane, but usually there's a sense of challenge. Now, in many of the great stories, the challenge is some kind of an empire or an outer force, and typically this represents the ego world, right? You're being challenged to come to the end of who you think you are, and in your impulse to defend yourself or to preserve yourself, your nation, your community, your village, your tradition, ironically, eventually you're going to leave it. You're going to come back different than everyone. And so it spirals. Now, in most of the great stories, and this is what Joseph Campbell points out, it's not always that simple, right? Sally has an ordinary day. On the way home, she sees some injustice, and now she's on the world stage. Usually there's resistance, refusal of the call. When it's a health journey, this is typically denial, right? We don't want to admit what we're facing. We don't think we can handle it. We better to avoid it. Or if there's some great lesson or healing or learning that's been presented to us, we avoid it and we just seek the comfort of the familiar. In the Joseph Campbell model, this is when some kind of an instigator shows up. I'm just quickly making sure I'm covering everything I wanted to. Oh. So typically the role of the mentor that shows up. Now, this varies in stories because sometimes the mentor then stays in the story of the hero. And in some cases, this person is an important bridge that helps them recognize the call, shows faith and hope, confidence, and often gives them some sort of a tool or a gift, whether it's the magic beans or whether it's the lightsaber or whether, whatever it may be. The mentor sort of gives the injection of energy and insight and lots of weird cryptic sort of foreshadowing of the future that inspires or gives enough courage to cross the threshold. Now, in real world, this could be a coach, a friend, a therapist. This could be someone who's been what you've been through before, but typically this is where we borrow the faith and energy of another so that we can have the bravery to cross the threshold. This is where we leave the ordinary. So now we're moving, if you remember the former slide, the crisis has come. The mentor said, you got to go, or you can do it. I believe in you, whatever it is. There's no other way. And so the separation begins. Now, this may, for us in the ordinary life, this is where we finally recognize I can't go on with things the way they are. That's the essence of the departure. So I didn't want to face it. I'm going to face it. And now I have to cross that threshold. And I'd say for a lot of us, when it's healing and psychology, this is a great place to get stuck because we've recognized there's an issue. We denied there was an issue. We recognized it again. We went for help. We're encouraged to do something about it. And then we go back for more encouragement. And then we go back for more encouragement. And then we go back for more encouragement. And we don't actually begin to take the steps. Crossing the threshold is taking the steps. That's when things get interesting. Okay. So Dorothy, you're no longer in Kansas. Luke, you're no longer on tattooing. I don't know. Jesus, you're no longer a carpenter. We all face this time where we're now moving into the unknown. And this is where, I thought it was interesting that Joseph Campbell puts quite a bit in this next stage because it's a lot. They could be seen as different steps, but I understand why they're all together. This is where you, or the hero, or the spiritual master, encounters tests, acquires allies, and makes enemies. This is often the largest sort of arc of the story, right? So this is Lord of the Rings, right? This is where the hobbits have left the Shire, and now it's adventure time, right? So can they cross the river? Who's the shadowy character? Is this person trustworthy? And we go through that too, because as we are on our own healing journey, we're trying new habits. We're losing friends. We're meeting new ones. We are discovering people that have been in our lives that may not be supporting us anymore, or we may now be in conflict with because we're doing things differently. In the storytelling model, this is usually like the middle hour of the movie with 30 minutes at the beginning and 30 minutes at the end. That's kind of the formula. And it's good. It's really good. But then what we're really seeing is the refinement of character. This is what we all go through in the arc of a lifetime too. We're out there in the world. The Hindu tradition had a model very similar to Joseph Campbell's, predated Joseph Campbell by 1,000 years or more. You're in the householder stage. But then you've acquired enough knowledge and character from this ordinary, I shouldn't say ordinary. You've acquired enough knowledge and character through tests and allies and enemies that the deeper work is now being revealed. This is where we start to realize that the main character in the story may have survived an incredible journey. So I don't know, Lord of the Rings is a book that many people read and a movie a lot of people saw. So yes, they overcame all kinds of battles and struggles and scary moments and exciting moments. It seems like a story complete in itself. And the same is true of other stories. And the same is true of our lives. We feel like, particularly as we pass midlife, okay, I've learned, I've grown, I've become myself. But no, 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 no. As Carl Jung would say, just when you think you got it all figured out, the universe is going to destroy it all or offer the opportunity to destroy it all. And so what Joseph calls this is the approaching the innermost cave. In other words, you begin to become aware that even though I just spent the last, 40, 50, 60 years of my life figuring everything out, I've missed something. There's a deeper driver in me that I haven't uncovered, I haven't faced. And I say midlife, but the truth is, a kind of life crisis like this can happen, anywhere, 35, 75, life is long. But the point is that we recognize that there is a bigger fight on the way, right? That's the kind of Hollywood version than any of the fights we've had before, and that all of the fights have been preparing us for, right? I mean, that's almost a cliche sort of framing. Uh, if you thought you've been through it until now, just wait. And then it becomes losing the business, retiring and becoming something you've never been before, facing why things didn't go the way you always, the way you always thought they would. Um, it's almost like you've come to a new threshold, right? Um, and you'll have like a minor, like the first threshold, fear, doubt. Um, but the point is, at this point, it's about to get rough, really rough. And this is where Joseph Campbell says that is like, that's the warm up, the approach. I think in Lord of the Rings, it's the approach to whatever that big, horrible, monstrous castle and monster was at the end. I can't remember. Saruman, something like that. Anyway, so whether it's Buddha under the Bodhi tree facing, Mara, the demon of illusion, or whether it's Luke Skywalker facing Darth Vader, or, all these things, we have to face the deepest places in ourselves. And it's actually, Jung would argue, I believe, it's why there is such a thing as a late life crisis. Because, and Bill Plotkin, someone Joni and I have referred to before, would say, I have a Plotkin book here somewhere, that even though we think we've been doing all this good growth work, pardon my French, but God damn it, there is some core aspect of self that's been underneath it all that we still haven't faced yet. So the ordeal is usually big. In storytelling, it's cataclysmic, right? The Avengers, I forgot about the Avengers. So superhero movies, there's always like the enemy that's bigger than all the other enemies. Like, I don't know how they can keep making these movies because it's always the same stupid path. The impossible enemy to face, and they have to face it. And so for us, this is very often looking at our core issues from our childhood, from our traumas, recognizing things that we thought were innate to our personality, but aren't even really who we are. And we're called to question the very, very limits of our existence and go beyond it. And this is what sacred texts and scriptures have shown us again and again. When you go beyond the known and you go beyond even the self that you've claimed, comes the reward. And the reward is, the reward for us is wholeness. And in our wholeness, a deeper connection to the spiritual, I would say, to the magical, to our spiritual intelligence of intuition, connection, energy, faith. We do acquire a new kind of power when we go to this deeper level of the healing journey. And in the movies or in books, the reward is often signified by something almost physical. So now the character has a power and they can shoot whatever light out of their eyes, or now they can heal people, or now they have a shield, or now they have a trident. That's the Aquaman story. They finally earned the ultimate gift that will differentiate them from who they were before, differentiate them from normal people, and will be the gift to take back to the ordinary world. But the road back is its own stage of the journey, and a very significant one for anyone on a healing path or a spiritual path, because this is where we have to realize, wow, I've just been through all this. I've just acquired all this. I've just done all this transformation. How the heck am I going to carry it with me? Who's going to understand me? What is my language? In healing terms, what will my new habits be? What relationships have to change? The road back is its own challenge. And if you've ever been on retreat or in workshops, there's that flight home or that long car ride home from the weekend workshop where you're savoring all the beauty of the time together. But good Lord, how are you going to make it work? And typically, what happens in the road back in the hero's journey and in the scripture is there is the last vestiges of doubt, because now we know we have these capacities, but we doubt our ability to carry them with us. And then finally, in that moment of doubt, I don't know if I can really do it. Maybe this is too much for me. And we find the resurrection, which means just when we think that we've already passed it all, the ordeal, the reward, the road back, there is often this, and I do have this sort of memory of stories and films where it's like, oh my gosh, I thought we did the final battle. I thought we did the big scene. I thought we defeated uh whatever that guy was in Avengers, Kronos, the big bad guy. I thought we defeated Darth Vader. I thought we defeated, the illusions of life and suffering. There is often a resurrection scene in which that which we have overcome comes back to test us one last time. And usually there is an ultimate death of the hero in this. And that is either that they give themselves to the final battle and realize, you see, and if it's sounding too redundant, the thing that's different on the road back is we're now connecting the pieces between this other world experience and journey and how you're going to live it. So think of it as like you're the hero coming back with all this experience and gifts, and your village is up ahead. And now the very thing that you just fought, illusion, separation, ego, has now popped up again, and it's ready to squish your village, not just you. And this is where in so many of these stories and in the archetype of the journey, we have to consider ultimate service, which is a very powerful conclusion to the cycle. Will I give myself not only for my own healing, but for the good of the world, for the good of the world, and let myself be sacrificed? It's interesting. It's called resurrection. I think a good word to add here is sacrifice. And we do see that, and that is in the story of Jesus. It shows up a little differently in the story of the Buddha, but there is in his final battles with Mara, because he did have an earlier ordeal and resurrection by the river where he realizes the middle path, and then he goes for more challenges later. The point is, I believe this is the moment where we have the ultimate ego death and the integration of the gift as purpose. We are now here for others. And then that concludes the cycle, which is we take all that we've become back to our lives. And now we begin the hard work of living it. And interestingly, that eventually becomes the new normal. And if you live long enough, you get to do it all over again. But I sort of laugh because this stuff can be pretty horrific, pretty hard stuff. I mean, this is, I'm making stories about movies and venture movies and Hollywood, but this is very much real world. And many of us have faced extremes of illness, loss of loved ones, loss of career, loss of self, divorce, bankruptcy. And these things, if you're willing, become the hero's journey. So I know I filled the time with my overview, which I too often do when I say I want to talk about it. And we can squeeze in a few chats and maybe we could go a few minutes over. But I guess the reason why I wanted to share it today, I mean, there's no good reason why I ever want to share anything because it's just an intuitive hunch. I think it's so valuable, no matter what we're facing, to remember that we are always on a journey, which means whatever you're in, you will not be in forever. So whether it's joy, well, great, savor it, enjoy it, and know that there will come a time where you won't have that comfort. And if it's fear and sorrow, learn from it, feel your way through it, because there will come a time where you will need its gifts and it will no longer be present. I mean, whenever I go through a hard time, it's sadistic, but I'm very careful not to distract myself from feeling it because I don't want to go through it again. If it's bad now, let's just let it be as bad as it could possibly be. And let's find those lessons and fight those monsters and realize those gifts so that this can be the bigger journey and not hundreds and hundreds of little ones because it's exhausting. And yet it's hopeful in the end. That's the message, which is our world is designed in such a way that love and wisdom are always a stage away. And that growth and healing, evolution is the nature of our existence, physically and spiritually. So we'll come back to the big group. I don't want to apologize for using up the time, but if anyone was really hoping to chat a lot, then I'll apologize. But let's get into it quick. And Loretta, go ahead, and then Jan, and we'll go a little bit over today. Not too far for those of you that have to go. Loretta, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I identified incredibly with this, and it was my recovery journey. And the interesting part about it is that when I was at stage 5, crossing the threshold, I was 2 years sober, and I had decided to go back to school to become a counselor. And I was broke. I was working part-time and going to school full-time. And I was in the bookstore with my books. And, I was really broke at the time. And I looked down and The Power of Myth was there. And it was a very expensive book. And I just looked at it and said, I have to have it. And I purchased it. And not only was it the change in my life that I was going through, but it was the beginning of my spiritual journey. And I was really in transformation at that time. And Joseph Campbell was very much a part of that transition. As a matter of fact, I just looked over and with my bedside books, I have a Joseph Campbell interview book. So
well, thank you. It's a cool story because it is kind of magical, the synchronicity and the gift. And it attests to a couple of things, which is in the story or in the journey model is the promise that if you begin the journey, the guides will show up.
Right.
But
Exactly.
you can't stay stuck or wedded to any one of the stages, or you won't get the gifts and the values of the next stage.
Yeah.
The other thing that that you also bring up for me, and I know this is true of your own work, is that sometimes the greatest thing a helper, healer, or mentor can do is to just normalize what you're going through so we can release the energy of questioning what we're going through and invest it in what we're going through, right? Like, I think so often we go to a doctor or a therapist or whatever, an expert on something. I mean, even like I took my car to the mechanic today and said, oh, it's doing this, and I've been worrying about it for a couple of weeks, to which he just immediately said, oh, yeah, that's normal for this kind of car. Problem solved. I didn't need to do anything. Jan, you had your hand up, and then Lanny has her hand up.
As you were going through this, we think of death as a failure. In any of these stages, death is a failure. but it's not. It's where we're all going to do. It's the final thing. And I was trying to figure out where could death fit into this
So
physical death. And I was thinking about in the ideal ordeal reward stage, when you said the reward is you get special gifts, maybe that could come with death. You get special gifts. I mean, we don't know what comes after it,
yes.
but where do you see physical death as fitting into here?
Well, I see the reality of physical death. So I'll step a little bit away and then come back to it. The reality of physical death and the perception of death, which is more emotional, the death of the self. I think it's actually a companion to the whole journey. Because leaving, let's quickly go back to it. So, the call to adventure inspires the fear of death itself. It's like, oh shit, that's why we refuse the call. I don't want to leave what I know, even if what I know isn't good. And then crossing the threshold is okay, I guess I'm going to face this. There's a kind of death there. And then in the tests and the allies and the enemies, there's often this, oh my God, we think they're going to die. Like I'm just putting it in the story sense. And in the moment, it is perceived as almost a real threat. Again, physically or just the identity. 100 times we'll watch an adventure story or movie and think, oh, they could die now. Oh, they could die now. Oh, they could die now. But then they keep living. Again, the innermost cave. That is the foreshadowing of the possible bigger death. And then they go through the ordeal, as you say, and that could be the death. That could be the moment of death. And yet, uh, Joseph Campbell probably would answer your question by saying it's that resurrection scene where the actual physical death gets planted, because that's the scene where Jesus comes back in spirit form. The rest of us would go on to wherever the soul goes next. But ultimately, the faith being that, well, here's an interesting twist on it for you, Jan. This is the way I see it. That the return, this is the way I see it. I think this is what you were asking. I believe the soul is doing the hero's journey. I think the physical death is step 11. And the return is when the soul goes back to the spirit world with all the life lessons. You become the gift that you take to the other side. I actually think that that's what's really going on here. I think we come to evolve. That's just personal. I don't know if Joseph Campbell would agree, but we come specifically to evolve. We become the gift. We take the elevated energy back to the next dimension. And sure, we would also be rewarded in kind, but who knows what that is? Because, well, we don't know. Because the only thing we can do is talk about it in metaphor and poetry and story. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you very much. I like that.
Yeah, cool. Lanny.
Well, I just gotta say how perfect the timing is.
Hmm.
I've been in the belly of the whale, that's what I call it. And it's nice knowing a bigger perspective. And I know that there's steps and blah blah blah, but the timing was so perfect today of going through all that known direction, things that it is a process, but I needed to have that reminder, especially today. So it was perfect. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. When you said that, for some reason, I don't know why, but all of a sudden the Old Testament just popped up into my head. And I thought of all the different journeys in that. I mean, Moses did it, right? Because, he was home, he left home, then he became part of the Pharaoh, and then he had to, resist the Pharaoh and flee, and then he was in the wilderness, and then he was guided. And you have to think about these stories in terms of the person going through it. We know the whole story because we've all read the entirety of the stories, even if it's Little Red Riding Hood. But imagine when you're going through the story, and I don't know why when you were talking, I thought of poor Moses. Oh, because you said belly of the whale. Because the Jonah story also repeats all this. I mean, imagine being poor Moses, right? And you'd be like, oh my gosh, I got to flee my beautiful kingdom, and now I'm lost in the desert. I'm screwed. I'm screwed. And then all of a sudden, the bush is talking to me. Oh, great. I'm saved. I'm saved. And then all of a sudden, I have to explain myself to people. I'm screwed. I'm screwed. And now I have a new community, and it's my real community. I'm saved. I'm saved. But now I got to go tell the Pharaoh he's wrong. I'm screwed. I'm screwed. And then I got to go part the Red Sea. I mean, like the whole thing is just like you would think it was always the end, but it's like one of these new Oscar nominated movies where instead of just a good hour and 40 minutes, it's got to be 3.5 flipping hours. It's too much hero's journey. Okay, Joni, how about you Joan, before we go? Sorry, Joan, I sometimes call you Joni. I don't mean to do that, but
No, it's all good. You know, it's so funny you said Moses because I kept thinking Joseph, and he's in the pit, and that
yeah,
is
Joseph.
and that is kind of like so similarly. Two things. When I've written, I loved what you said back to Jan because what I was shown when I asked about what is age and what is death and and what came through was in other realms. Time is measured in lessons learned, and life is measured in mastery of lessons.
Beautiful.
So just wanted to, that's one. And two is the most valuable for me. I don't separate it. Maybe I don't know. I never seem to have time to separate from the, like right now I'm in Arizona. It's 115, 112. And I moved back. I I had the mold and the black and I had to pay and then I moved back and it's like there's no air conditioning except for the last 5 days and they're here today. So I was able to join. But it was so interesting to me. I've always known since I was a little girl, my two words are truth and knowing. And I go into this fierce battle. That's not true. That's not true. No, there is. I picture. And this last time, this horrible, like for me, black mold, I can't afford. They won't let me out of my lease. It's $42,000. I don't have the money. How am I going to? It's another of the crises. And I didn't fight. I didn't say no. That's not true. No. So sometimes the battle is.
Oh yeah.
Knowing when you don't fight and you accept.
Yeah.
And then you are released and you go to the next stage.
Yes. Well, thank you. That's a wonderful note to end on. Because just to honor people's time. But that's actually I really love that. I think the thing that's so important about what Joan just pointed out is I really don't think that cycle is contestable. I think that we all live it in some measure, and that is the progress. However, it is the internal experience that really determines the story. In other words, Joan gave the example where her battle, so to speak, if this is the metaphor of was letting it go. And I've seen that, for example, I just had a coaching call with someone about a work thing, and earlier in the week, someone in a relationship, and it was the same two things. The relationship needs to end. And they're caught thinking that fighting for it is the next stage of the journey. But the truth is, fighting for it is the easy thing for them because staying stuck in it is what they've been doing forever. The hard thing is actually doing nothing and letting it go. And similar with the job, this person keeps trying to train and figure out how to stay in something that is just so clearly not for them. And the hardest thing they can do is just to go to their employer and say, I know we've all moved mountains to get me into this position, but it's not for me. So yeah, I think that's a very, very important reframe. Well, listen, there's always so much to talk about, and I'm always glad that it feels like we're ending too soon. But I want to thank you for being here with me. I am going to be back next week. you know, if enough of you say, no, let's return to the same story, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll go on to something different next week. But I'm grateful you're here. And I wish you blessings and taking the time to consider where you may be in your own cycle and your own journey and enjoy whatever that stage is. Because maybe you're in a moment of being in normal. I would enjoy that. Just enjoy it. Maybe you're in a moment of returning, or maybe something's coming up. Whatever it is, it won't be forever. So, with that, love and blessings from each and all of us to each and all of us. And we'll see you soon. Bye bye.